Good afternoon, everybody. This is Vern Tepe. I call to order the special public service meeting of Friday, January 14, or no, Tuesday, January 11.
Hope it doesn't last that long.
Pardon me, I'm beginning to forget where I am. Want to thank everybody for their indulgence. So we'll call to order, and can we have a roll call, please?
Brown,
Brown here.
Leonard,
Leonard.
Lewis,
Who was here?
Shepro,
Shepro present.
Surges, Copey,
Opie's here.
Tepe.
Tepe here.
Of course.
Okay, we have at least one individual who wants to speak, and that is Mr. Mark Avalar.
Didn't know if you're going to approve the minutes first.
I'm sorry, we're going to skip the approval of minutes and go to our regular, we'll have approval of minutes at our regular meeting.
Mr. Chairman,
later this
Shepro,
month.
do we have minutes that we are simply choosing not to bring forward?
Just a matter of time and trying to make things expedient.
Well, I may have some thoughts about that later on. I mean, given the nature of what's been said, I think it's important that we actually have approved minutes that we can refer to, because a lot of the discussion is, I think, going to revolve around what has been said at previous meetings.
Okay, I have not seen any minutes. Are they here? They are not here.
And I take that would also be true of the previous meeting minutes as well.
Yes, and that was discussed at the last minute
Yes,
meeting
well,
saying.
I wasn't happy about that either. All right, well, if there's no minutes presented, I guess there's no minutes that can be approved, so.
Okay, Mr. Avalar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I know you have a very busy agenda today, so I'll be very brief. I want to thank the county for posting the draft precinct maps online. I definitely took a cursory view. Obviously, I'm more interested in my home township only because I'm more familiar with it. And when it comes to the what the challenge that the state placed the county and all of the affected individuals, and particularly the clerk's office, I do commend what I was hearing last Friday on the video replay, that all of you have had a challenge, and this is faced by counties all around us too. I know what's going on in McHenry. They'll be approving theirs tomorrow night because I live in a community that's in both counties. I'll be as brief as I can. Overall, I think the precinct map that I've seen for Dundee is good. Could it be a little better with some tweaking? I think it could, but I will listen to what the direction will be that the committee has. If there is any public input to how might we improve, and even the numbers of registered voter population to make it the precincts even more even. I do go back to the late 1990s, and I recall my hometown of Algonquin was only 2 precincts. Now we've grown to 7, and I'm sure there's similar growth seen. Sugar Grove Township, 12 precincts, Blackberry, 11, and Rutland, neighboring Rutland Township, is up to 14. Just reflects a lot of growth in the area here. I just want to, and I see that's on the agenda, there's going to be a discussion of the purpose of precincts. And given some of the statements said in the print media last Friday and echoed again on Politico on Monday morning, I always want to remind folks, the precincts, the manifest purpose of precincts, and I'm not quoting any law, I'm just quoting my common sense here. The manifest purpose is for the efficient administration of elections. The average voter is not married to a precinct number, let alone a precinct. The only thing an average voter is going to want to know, and that's assuming they still vote on election day at their polling place, is where is their polling place, and obviously the hours. Certainly the having to even out the population of the precincts is necessary. Yet when I saw the press coverage starting to veer into the established political parties, from where I'm sitting, that's a latent purpose of precincts. Yes, it's in the election code, and I respect all those, and I was a precinct committee person myself in another life. Yet it's just, this is focused on what the county services must be for the voters. I'm certainly know that the polling places will be determined at a later time. And I'm hoping that we're not going to see like I'm seeing in neighboring McHenry County, where there are 6 or up to 7 precincts stacked into one polling place. You go of 2 precincts in a polling place, now you've got a vote center, not a polling place anymore. And just, I know those are discussions that will take place later, and the clerk's office is more than ready to meet the challenge of neighborhood precinct polling places. I do know under the new law, you have to set up a countywide vote center for election day, which all of you will oversee. But just, I wish the committee well as you review the draft maps, and I look forward to the presentation. And I'll be listening if there's any place for any public input to the maps themselves. Certainly, I'm at least one person who want to participate, and I'm sure there'll be others. Thank you so much, and I yield the balance of my time.
Thank you. Is there anybody else with public comments? Okay, I have some opening remarks to make. I didn't write them out, so I want to get them out. When this whole project began, not too long ago, there were a set of objectives and priorities that Mr. Feinstock did a great job in eliciting. And one of the things that we accomplished, which was the first one, was to reduce the number of extremely large precincts.
Parliamentary inquiry,
We
Mr.
got,
Chairman.
I'm making a statement, sir, you're not recognized.
I'm entitled to raise a parliamentary inquiry. All right, fine, go ahead.
Part of our objective, as I said, was to reduce the number of polling of precincts that were extremely large. As Mr. Feinstock will show you in his presentation, that part was accomplished. Second was to reduce the number of precincts that were small and to combine them. That was accomplished. Now we are going to be faced with the challenge going forward of still having quite a few precincts that are over 12 or 13 and even over 1,400 people. There just was not enough time to get all of that work done and do it well. But the key thing is that the county can, going forward, divide larger precincts. It cannot redraw lines except after the census. So this committee and the board will have the ability to handle those larger situations. Okay. So thank you. I had asked the,
Mr. Chairman,
yes, sir, Mr. Shepro.
you've used, since we had a debate earlier about pronouns, you've several times said we or our. And I'd like to know who is the we and who is the our? Because it is my understanding that nobody on this committee except the chairman had any role in any of this. And so it seems to me that the personal pronoun here would be I and not we.
Thank you. That'll be addressed later.
Thank you. I hope so.
I had asked the clerk to put on a presentation of the purpose and functions of precincts. Are you prepared to do that? Yes, sir. Thank you.
My name is John Duggan. I'm one of the deputy clerks, and I have been tasked with certain election-related aspects of it. And so the emphasis we would make is very similar to what Mr. Aguilar stated, and that is that precincts are not electoral districts for federal, state, county, or municipal elections. The purposes and policies of the provision of the election code and the regulations which control precincts have as their objective the orderly and efficient administration of elections. We now have multiple ways to have elections. We have mail-in voting, which has been utilized by our voters extensively. And we expect, based on trends and polling, that this will continue to be a preferred method of voting. We have never had a situation where, even in the larger precincts, there are backup lines at 7 o'clock when voting closes and people wait hours to, cast their vote. We have never had that type of a problem with the administration of the precincts as the election authority for Kane County. So as you approach this, we would ask you to consider not only the convenience of the voters, which is very important, and that does, relate to their right to vote, but also we would emphasize that each precinct has a capital cost. Each precinct has marginal costs of payroll for the election. And we would encourage you to adopt this map because we feel it contains the correct cost benefit judgment to maximize the convenience of the voters, maximize the efficiency of administration, and minimizing extra costs that would be incurred if we had a large number of smaller precincts. Each precinct also has potential for error. They have potential for, machine failure. So we don't want to have more precincts than are necessary. And of course, we don't want to have less than are necessary. But I think that we commend the GIS and the mapping department and the parties who were at all the open meetings where these were conducted. They were conducted on Zoom and anybody could have attended had they chose to. We also feel that the county board's function in drawing precincts should not be conflated with reapportionment. Precincts are based on the number of registered voters, not the census data. So there's a different public policy, a different purpose, and different objectives. And I think the practicality that is an important operative term that should be kept in mind with respect to your decision. And we would commend the work that's been done and the conclusions that have been reached. I'm here to answer any questions you would have about those comments or anything else about the process from the clerk's perspective as election authority.
Does anybody have any
Copy,
questions for
Mr.
Mr. Dugan?
Yes.
Opie?
Mr. Copey?
I'll defer to Mr. Kobe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just point of inquiry, we had increased the number of precincts, but have we increased the number of polling places? And what was the average cost to conduct an election and it's hard to say per precinct because you got big ones and small ones, say per polling place. And is there an increase in polling places? And what has the cost increased? And what is the average cost? Is that possible to answer that question?
We haven't determined the cost. We would be very happy to prepare and present a cost summary to you from the last election.
Thank you.
Right. I mean, we have to determine the polling places from the number of precincts.
That okay, Mr. Copey?
Yes, thank you. That'd be fine. Just as a note, I know that several precincts had congregated at one or two different polling places here in Rutland for the past years, and seems to work fine. And changing a venue from this location to that location, they have to drive the opposite direction a mile. I don't see how that would make much sense. But if we need to increase the polling machines and maybe segregate the activity by precinct or something within that venue, maybe that would be a consideration.
The marginal cost per precinct is still 5 judges for each precinct, even when they're aggregated in a combined polling place.
Which is one of the reasons why you want to keep the number of precincts down.
Exactly. Right.
Okay, Mr. Shepro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Duggan, you said, I think, I wrote it down, that we've never had a backup of voters in any precinct waiting to vote, and I wondered
Okay.
if there was a time frame attached to that.
Just from my own recollection,
Okay.
and based, I mean, I'm sure everybody has probably a few people, but it hasn't been hours and hours that we've seen in other places. But have you recalled times when we needed to have more
I mean,
polling
I
places?
recall being present at watching lines wrap around in Sun City. and other voting locations on election day. I don't know how recently that's occurred, but I was struck by it's never been a backup.
Well, I'm thinking about the one that I'm most familiar with is the new Aurora Vote Center on Downer, and even on election day, they were done at 7:30.
You also referred to, I think, that this process was conducted through open meetings where people could attend via Zoom.
I believe so. We had a Zoom meeting and I was able to observe it for a while.
I don't recall any Zoom meeting involving the precinct division, which was open to anybody other than the staff that was working on it and Mr. Tepe.
I don't believe they were open either.
Okay, they may not have been, we may not have had everyone there, but I don't think there was any attempt to keep anybody out.
Not to denigrate the cost benefit judgment, are you aware of any provision in the election code which allows a cost benefit judgment as a justification to not follow what the statute says you're supposed to do?
Well, we believe that you are following what the statute says. The statute, the operative word in the statute is practicability, and I think practicability implies a cost benefit analysis.
This is,
You know,
maybe-
go ahead.
Oh, that's, finish your answer. I'm
No,
sorry.
I mean, every element of government has a cost benefit analysis that's associated with it. And this is a mandatory requirement of the election code, that should be done, but it is measured by practicability.
One of the comments was made about each precinct requiring 5 judges by state law, which I think that is correct.
Yes.
And yet, when I have been explaining some of this to people I have worked with, they have pointed out to me that in the last election in precinct or vote center after vote center, there were nothing approaching 5 judges for each precinct that was at the vote center. So I'm wondering if there is a legal position as to why that, if one, is it true? Because I observed in many cases myself that it was true. And if so, what is the consequence of that?
Well,
If they're not
I'm
enough.
sure your observations are truthfully related. And what are the consequences? Well, I mean, all the elections have been certified and I don't.
I guess I'm saying, so, I mean, it is not a fatal defect if a precinct doesn't have the full
Well, but we
complement of 5 judges.
obviously, everybody doesn't show up every time and they are volunteers.
It is true, is it not, that the election code makes precinct committeemen elected officials,
Yes.
and that
They
they
are party
have,
officials though. They're not.
and they have but the party rules with respect to that are not party rules there in the statutes of the
Right.
state. And that the size of the precincts and the primary vote in those precincts by state law determines the relative influence and votes that are cast in party affairs by.
I think in both Democrat
elected committee.
and Republican parties, which are the only ones that have engaged in primaries, but all of their precinct committeeman votes are weighted by the amount of registered voters in their precincts. So in the Republican, at least it is. I'm
Maybe
same
this
in the
is not a
Democrats.
question for you, but for perhaps Mr. Pollack. As I understand it, the statute that provided the 60-day deadline
Yes.
Was passed in mid-November. I forget the exact date. I think
November
it was
15th, right?
15th.
Yeah.
When did your office determine that required action to do something about the existing precincts?
Well, we understood the process and I know it was referred to the state's attorney, which opined on, how it could be accomplished. Our concern as the election authority with the time compression is that the data, the voter data, has to be reconciled with the change in precincts. And our concern is that, candidates rely upon that data, for planning their walk lists. Now, there's other sources of that similar data. And, we're concerned is that a couple things have to happen. We have to get the early votes, the voting out, and they have to, be coordinated with their ballots. We have to get, you, for instance, might come in and ask for a walk list of a particular precinct. And, so that data, it's a complex matter. We have 318,000 registered voters, and to make sure each of the data gets corresponded with the map information is something we're working with our data processor to see if they can do that reliably. Or do we have to put some form of disclaimer so that candidates relying upon them? And we also have a compressed petition process. And although they've reduced the number of required signatures on a petition, in the past, candidates have relied upon the clerk's data for generating the names and addresses of the registered voters within a particular election district. So that's a big concern. And, it's the compression of time for that. We didn't even get the legislative map until last week, as you know, so.
So I
And
guess my
we
question.
won't get the city of Aurora ward maps until after the 14th.
So my question is, given all that and having had a lot of personal involvement with the clerk's office in discussing the question of precinct division for the last several years, it appeared to me that the fairly consistent position of the clerk's office was, as you've indicated, that there was an immense amount of work that had to be done.
Yes.
There was not enough time to do it. And as recently as the second week of December, I was invited to go to your office and to, in effect, be lobbied for the fact that we were only going to do 4 precincts, the top 4 in registered voters. So I'm wondering what happened, and is it the position of the clerk's office that they are doing this because the county board essentially is demanding that it be done? Or did the impetus to change from going from 4 to 24 to 200 plus come from your office, or was that something that you were directed to do? And I say that's really a question for anybody who can answer that.
Anybody can answer it. And the maps are drawn by the county board. The precinct maps are determined by the county board. We have to then reconcile our election data to those maps. And, our concern is that the candidates who, or the campaigns that want to rely upon that data, we can't verify, the perfect accuracy of them until we, go through the data, and so if we get the maps at a late date, then the data will not be immediately available for people who in the past have relied upon them. I
But it
understand.
was an immense task.
It is an immense task.
And you didn't get it all at once. You got it piecemeal. You got the county
Well-
board, then you got the legislative, but the legislative was on hold, and then you got the congressional maps.
Right.
And so,
We still don't have the city wards.
and so, I mean, again, I'm trying to understand why we did a complete change from we were only going to do 4 precincts to now we're going to try to do all of them, which seemed to be, I mean, I think the county clerk's office was right when it said there's not enough time to do all this by the deadline. And I think Mr. Teppe's opening comments seemed to confirm that there wasn't enough time to do everything that arguably the statute said is supposed to be done.
We could theoretically,
Mr. Shepro, if you had an agreement with the county clerk to only do 4 precincts in the county, it might have been nice for you to have shared that information with me.
I didn't have an agreement and you didn't ask me for any input. But I did not have any such agreement. I was told that was what was going to be done. And was I going to make a fuss about it?
I think every county recognized that the task would be the same difficulty proportionate to the number of voters in that county that we recognized. And, you know, we're trying to do the best we can practicably within the time frame of the statute. And I think that's to be commended. I think that we're doing the best we can. And I think that the state's attorney gave an opinion that this had to be done at this time. And I believe following the state's attorney's opinion is part of our function as well as yours. You know, so we're trying to do the best we can within the constraints of time and practicality.
I want to make it clear that I think your office did an amazing job in getting done what it has done, and the same thing of the staff. My concern, as you probably figured out by now, is the process by which the chairman of this committee chose to go about doing it and give directions. But I guess we're straying from the purpose and function of precincts. So I will withhold my other comments at this time.
Thank you.
Go ahead, let's get them all out now.
Okay, well, all right. So Mr. Duggins indicated that there was an opinion from the state's attorney that all of this had to be done. I'd like to find out, when was that opinion rendered, and why does that appear to conflict with the conversations that I had with the state's attorney and their staff as late as the middle of December, when we were essentially in the conversation I was party to, and Mr. Chairman, you were in that meeting with me, where we were hoping that Mr. Cunningham would agree to cooperate in splitting not 4 precincts, but 24 precincts. And somehow the statute was passed back in November, and I'm wondering what changed that after November, when we were talking about doing a handful of precincts, because there wasn't time to do it right. What changed? What event occurred that suddenly we decided we had to do it all? And in fact, as your opening comments, I think, made clear, we didn't accomplish it. We still have much to do. We still have, according to my count, we started with 76 precincts that were too large under the new state law. And we were told that the 60-day requirement meant that it wasn't optional. We had to address it. Now, the map and the proposal in front of us, and I'm assuming, I haven't had time to check because we just got these maps yesterday. I'm assuming that in fact, the proposed maps, in fact, meet the requirement that there be no overlapping precincts, districts within precincts. So if that's true, nevertheless, instead of 76 precincts that don't meet the 1,200 requirement, we have actually increased that to 101. We've gone backwards in the time period that's been done.
Okay, so Mr. Shepro, what's your question?
My question is, I said maybe at this point it's a comment, but my question is, who decided to prioritize cutting back on precincts, which was optional, putting aside whether we could only do it now? Nothing said we must reduce precincts. We must combine precincts that are small. We had the option to do that. Somebody decided that with a scarce amount of time and no opportunity for public input or review, that we would focus on combining small precincts and not on solving the problem of having too many precincts that were too large. We've actually increased the number of precincts that are too large. So I don't know if this were challenged, how we would say to a court, gosh, we just didn't have enough time to get it all done. And thereby we actually created more of an illegality than we started with. So I just like to know, since this committee was never asked to give any guidance at any point in this process to anybody. And the last meeting I asked, has anybody been contacted that I don't know about? And there was no response. So I'm back to, one, the committee's been irrelevant to this process. And second, somebody made a conscious decision that they would put us further in violation of the law in order to save money on precinct splits. That's my question.
You've lost me. Please restate the question because I can't
All right, let
understand.
me put
what
it
question
directly
you're
then,
asking.
Mr. Chairman, if I lost you. Was it in fact your decision that staff would be directed to focus on consolidation of precincts rather than dividing the precincts that were in violation of state law?
No,
So who made that decision?
I don't think any one individual made that. I think that as was presented on Thursday, there was a whole set of priorities which were very well delineated by Mr. Feinstock that said these are the priorities that we are going to use and the steps we're going to go through.
Okay, who
And
said,
let me finish, please.
yes,
Okay, and those were the priorities that were gone through. All of that was discussed with personnel from the state's attorney's office, with personnel from the county clerk's office, with IT, and with GIS.
and not
It was
with
to say,
anybody.
would you
on-
please let me finish and quit interrupting me?
Yeah, I don't want to get thrown out of here like the other people that have argued with you. Go ahead.
Perhaps might be appropriate,
Perhaps.
but I've shown you consideration. I expect you to show it to me also.
You've shown this committee no consideration, Mr. Chairman.
If
Not one person you've identified in that list was a member of this committee.
if I may interrupt, please, let's be civil, gentlemen, please. This is not, arguing between amongst yourself is not going to advance this agenda.
Please continue.
Mr. Chairman, Copey, please.
Wait a minute. Wait, excuse me, Mr. Copey. Let me finish my answer. As I said, there were discussions which included the state's attorney, IT, the county clerk, the GIS department, and a whole set of priorities that were established by Roger, which was communicated to all of those groups. And I will tell you, I don't think any one person made the decision to do it. I think it was the consensus of, we think we can get this done, okay? You seem to want to be extremely critical of what was done in saying that the numbers show that we did not do the job, okay? And I doubt if there's anything that would change your opinion associated with that. But that's not the real objective that we're trying to get accomplished here. We have a whole set of precinct lines and that have been established as suggestions, and it's this committee's job to decide whether or not it wants to put that forward. And that's why the state's attorney here is here to handle the legal aspects of it. And that's why the county clerk is here to answer your questions. Okay, Mr. Copey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We allude to a letter from the state's attorney regarding an opinion, and the question was asked, what was the date on that? And furthermore, what was the content of that letter, and if it is available, or is it a letter? Thank you.
I recall emails that were going back and forth as well as conversations. Roger?
So the original message dated December 28th was a Westlaw attachment from Michelle Neerman that started the statutory provisions and a meeting that was held on that day at 9 o'clock. And the people that received that message were State's Attorney Jamie Mosser, Madam Chair Corinne Pirog, County Clerk John Cunningham, Public Service Committee Chair Vern Tepe, Ken Shepro, Roger Fonstock, Jane Talish. And then there was a list of other staff associated with it. That was on December 28th. So
So
that was the
that-
real start of the process.
That was a real start of this key process. Did you get that, Mr. Copey?
Yeah, that's fair enough answer. But what I'm really looking for is what was the pertinence of the state's attorney's posture or the need for pulling out of a special meeting that we had attempted to conduct, and what is the pertinence to that situation, to what we have accomplished to date? What had changed?
Ms. Moser.
This is State's Attorney Mosser. There was additional information that was provided to us that there was a company that could be used that was helping with the data portion of it. Depending on what that company was going to be able to provide, I think was going to affect the plan that was being put forth in regards to how the lines were being drawn. The purpose of delaying it from, I believe it was the Wednesday to the Friday, was just so that we would have the necessary information as opposed to saying one plan one day and another plan the other day. We just wanted to have all of the information so that we could present one plan to the community without trying to confuse everything.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir, Mr. Shepro.
I don't think I still got an answer to, you said that no one person was involved, and we rattled off a long list of people that were involved, but as far as I can tell, the only board member involved in setting the priorities, the plan, was you. And
I will agree that the only board member involved, but the process involved the county clerk's office, involved IT, and involved GIS, and involved the state's attorney. And I don't think there was any one person necessarily driving it. It was a matter of, can we get this done? And I would say there was more of a consensus because all of those individual departments were involved,
but not this committee. Agreed?
not this committee.
QED.
Mr. Chairman Tuppy,
Yes.
Ms. Gumps, rather,
Ms.
only
Yes.
myself. I know I'm not on this committee, but I've got a few statements. I think that I'm a little bit confused. I'm confused by the contention in this room. I might be missing something. I would like that explained to me. Furthermore, when we're in committee and we have projects that are done, we rely on staff, we rely on state's attorney's office. There might be one board member that sits and has a conversation and an idea is struck, and then a plan is created, and then that is brought back to the committee for committee involvement. I, again, with all due respect, might be missing something here. Sounds like I am, but there's an implication, an underlying implication that something was done nefariously. I don't believe that is true. And if we are going to go by that standard of every board member on a committee needs to be involved and engage with staff that's actually doing work that we're asking them to do, I don't think that is practicable. So maybe I'm missing what the contention is here, but it's not helpful. It's not productive, and it's confusing me. Therefore, it must be confusing the public. Thank you for letting me make a comment.
Thank you. I concur. Shall we proceed?
Personal privilege point, Mr. Chairman. I did not ever suggest that every member of this committee had to be involved, but we had the right to be informed, and we had the right to participate if we wanted. And our county code says the committee has oversight, not that the chairman of the committee may act unilaterally with however many people that are not part of the committee. And the process, why couldn't you have told us what you were doing? Why couldn't you have told us what the staff was recommending in terms of the timeline, in terms of the reach of it? We had all these changes, and the only information I received, and I wanted to receive information, I didn't necessarily want to sit in on every meeting. But I think we ought to needed to have been aware that there somebody was setting a course, somebody was setting priorities, and the public statements that were made were to the effect that everything was under control and we were going to meet the deadline and satisfy the statute. So I'm sorry that the tone has not turned very nice in all this, but I really feel that the process was completely ignored. I mean, as to the cancellation of the meeting, we never really knew why until Ms. Masser offered it now, why it was that we couldn't proceed at that first meeting. I'm just enormously disappointed in how this process is unfolded.
I think you've made that quite evident.
I have. Thank you.
Copy, please.
Mr. Copey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question in regards to the maps. When were the maps posted to the public? What day was that? And
All of that was done by staff under the direction of Roger. Can you please explain that, Roger?
So the completion of the maps were done over the weekend on Saturday, and Monday we had a final review. They were posted yesterday. They would have been distributed by email and then posted to the website sometime early afternoon, 11. I think we sent them out and posted shortly thereafter. So that they've been posted to the Public Service Committee agenda packet on the website. The ordinance was put out with the agenda as far as a title for today's meeting. That was done with the notice, but the ordinance I handed out and I think was subsequently sent out at the same time.
I'm a little confused by that.
so essentially the public knew the maps intimately in some consideration than even the Public Service Committee. So
Yesterday.
that adds to the point of contention that Mr. Shepro was alluding to, and Ms. Gumbs.
Well, the timeline was described in our last meeting with the set of priorities that in Roger's presentation. When we were going through it, I will say that if you look back, and I'm trying to think back in some detail, the first challenge was for GIS to reconcile the boundary lines, because we had boundary lines for not only county board, but we also had it for state representative, and we also had it for congressional. Those particular boundary lines, put them into GIS, created a whole group of, I'll say, orphan pieces that had to be dealt with. And that took GIS 2 days at least to take care of. They did a fine job with that. And then the county clerk staff and GIS staff really started on changing the precinct information Thursday morning. And that aspect of things was completed perhaps early Friday afternoon. That'd be about right, Roger?
Yes.
Okay, but so they tackled the challenge of the largest precincts. Got got as far as they could do with that on Thursday. Then on Friday, they tackled with combining the smaller precincts. We still have some disparities, but the key thing is that the disparities can be dealt with during the next 10 years. The key things that they dealt with were the things that can only be done once every 10 years. And I think the staff did a phenomenal job in getting that accomplished. But certainly it's a very, very short timeline, and I can understand everybody's consternation in the short timeline in trying to get this done and trying to get this done accurately.
Mr.
Yes.
Chairman, this is Alan.
Ms. Allen, go ahead.
There are ramifications here that I certainly can't appreciate, and that those of you who are there can. But what I wanted to say was that I'm in the 20th year of my board membership, and it's been such an honor. But that whole time, we have been agonizing over big precincts where development occurred and growth occurred and voters showed up and wanted to vote. And the clerk's office dealt with the problem that you described about people standing out in the cold trying to get into a building to vote by moving, logistically handling where those voting places would occur. So maybe you weren't voting at your church anymore. Maybe you were voting in a more appropriate place or a larger place or a warmer place or a handicapped accessible place. But the clerk's office stepped in to take care of that kind of thing. But we were still agonizing over the size of some of those precincts. And I think everybody gets a whole lot of credit here, certainly from me, and I'm sure many of us, to have solved that problem of the oversized precincts. And I am in an area where I have tiny precincts with very few voters, so it made sense to combine those. And I'm grateful to do that, because if we can keep our number of precincts around 300, then we don't have the monetary ramifications that would be so worrisome to us. So I see this as a win for all of us, and a win for the process, in that we got rid of the biggest problems. We kept the number of precincts about right. And so yes, you might have a precinct that was 900 and is now 1,200, or was 1,100 and is now 1,300, but that's a lot more even for us to deal with than those ones with the 7,000 voters in them. So thanks for the hard work. I'm grateful to see this. It's been a long time coming. Thanks for getting it done.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Mr. Surges.
Just a question, just a couple of questions. And again, I'm trying to come up to speed on everything and wrap my arms around this from a layman's perspective. But when and these are not in an order in any way, shape, or form. When we did the redistricting of the county boards, we said if somebody lived in this area, they needed to remain in their district. Is that the same thing for a precinct committeeman?
No.
Okay, so that was
None
not.
of that was considered.
Okay.
None of that was
Okay,
considered.
and I'm just data. And the goal was to get an equal size to each precinct.
Well, again, there were multiple goals, okay? The key goal was to deal with the precincts that had become extremely large.
Right,
Again,
understood.
Those well over 2,000, up to 7,000. All of those are shrunk down. All of those have been divided.
Okay.
The second goal was to deal with the very small precincts, okay?
What do they average out to? Ish.
Roger can
The
quickly
average,
give you
I
the
could show
numbers.
it. Yeah, actually, Blair, if you want me to share.
But the key thing is that those are the things that we can really only deal with every 10 years,
Understood.
okay? Breaking up any precinct, we can do on an annual basis. And the key thing is, as I understand what the state's attorney has shared with me is that has to be done every year. So that's something that needs to be looked at every year, is breaking up the large precincts. And that can be done every year again.
Okay. So Raj, just in
Sure.
general, what is your,
This may help a little bit in explaining it. This is a table of the precincts, and it's ordered by population. So this is what you have currently.
yep,
And the important part is this little table to the right, which is the 24 over 2000. That was the splits that originally we'd worked on with elections. And then there was 38 over 16. These are inclusive of each other too. So 38 includes the 24. 41 includes the 24. And when we have 75 over 1200 right now. And then if you look at after, this is after all of that work is done. You have none of those really large over 2000. We do
so
have
averaging 15 to 1600.
We're probably less than that, the average
Less than that.
wise. Yeah, we're probably close to the 1200 average. I could
Slide
do
that down. Yeah.
Yeah, I could do that average for you if you give me a second.
No, I just, no, keep sliding down there.
Sure.
But when the work started on Thursday morning, we truly did not know how far
So
the people were going to be able to get.
Okay, and so let me,
Okay.
so on those areas, and I'm just going to use, I'm an anomaly. I live in Rutland by 100 feet, and most of the stuff I do is in Dundee Township. So, but I'm not naive to say that Pingree Grove was the big explosion for us. So when I look at it, I go, there's the biggest population density change that we've had. So the goal was to take Pingree's 10,000 people that were a cornfield in the last census and break that down to what, 1,500? So it's 10,000 people divided by 1,500 people per precinct. This is whatever that math is. Was that kind of the goal?
No, the goal was to break up all the
Wait, what was the
precincts that were too
methodology?
big. And there wasn't a goal of saying anything to any particular area. The reason we still have so many large precincts is that there just was not time to really effectively deal with dividing them up.
Okay.
It was a matter of a set of priorities and the way it worked out. I will tell
So
you.
how much
that-
more time might we, Vern, I did not mean to cut you off. How much more time might we need to get to the ideal? And what's the ideal? I've yet to hear, I don't know what, like if we said you got 6 more months, guys, let's get to X. What's X? I don't even understand that.
Had we had perhaps another week, okay, but that could have been done much better.
But what is
Right.
X? What was X?
Getting to
Mr.
1,200,
1,200 is X.
yeah,
Okay.
getting to 1,200.
Okay.
So,
And that's what I was looking for. Is 1,200 the number that we were trying to get the small ones up to that and the big ones down to that?
But there are other things that have to be accomplished. And, Roger, why don't you go over
So
that?
now when you're really naive, it's really
you know,
easy.
I think it's important to go back to the original kind of 3-part approach to this. So the first part goes through the alignment of the precincts with the various jurisdictional boundaries. So we started there. That was part 1. And that's something that my understanding is that is done after the decennial census, alignment of the precincts with the new boundaries. We got new county board districts, we got new legislative, representative, congressional districts. And the direction we received was to make sure that the precincts represented one district. So we were trying to avoid that version of the split precinct, not splitting it by voter population, just where do you split jurisdictionally, fix that. So we did all the alignment. That was part 1. That was done January 3rd and 4th. We went through and had staff correcting the lines to match the jurisdictional boundaries. Then it was look at the 24, which I was showing, the 24 that are over 2,000. How do you deal with splitting those down to get down to the 1,200? Subsequently, maybe step down to get down to the 1,200. And then the question is, when do you stop because you do not have enough time to render all the maps and get it back to the Public Service Committee at a special public service meeting and get it in front of the county board for a special county board meeting and get it adopted by the statutory deadline of January 15th. So that's kind
Roger,
of the
please
nuts.
don't think as you
Yeah.
dodge the sun.
Yeah, that's kind of
Don't think I'm
the,
being critical by any
No.
means.
Oh, no,
In
no.
my particular situation, my subdivision, my street on the
Yes.
west side is Rutland.
yes.
The rest of the subdivision is Dundee. So of
Sure.
course, all the neighbors at Christmas are, well, you're going to get that fixed, right? You serve on the committee. No, I'm not going to get that fixed. Then you have the questions from precinct people saying, hey, listen, I don't want this combined, so I'm out of a precinct now. I
So-
don't know that that was a consideration, but it was for us when we redid our
Sure.
county
So-
board
so-
seats.
But getting back,
And I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying I didn't have the information to
Sure.
respond to the questions. And that's all I'm asking. I'm
So-
not critical of the methodology.
Precincts cannot cross township lines.
Well, I know you can say that, but when you've been mowing lawns with each other for 20 years, anything.
if I may, Mr.
Your
Chairman.
lawnmower can.
Your lawnmower can do it. You know what I'm saying?
Mr. Chairman, so to finish the answer to your first question, in order to address the other, and Mr. Shepro, you'd mentioned 101, it's 102 that are over the 1,200. And there's one that's 1,200 exactly. So if you wanted to get them all, you'd be between 102 and 103. In order to do those, we discussed, spending 2 weeks splitting the remainder, which at that point, 2 weeks from now, we would not be able to meet the January 15th deadline. That's just not a possibility. And the splitting of those 102 that are over 1,200 would result in the creation of 102 new precincts.
right.
At that point,
Do the math.
that
Just-
changes. What we have right now is 291 precincts that are going to become 292 based on the work that's before you today in the ordinance. So we went from 291 to 292. In terms of the election authority, the county clerk's office, managing the precincts, managing the election judges, voter education changes, that is, a lot less significant than if we dive into the next 102, which I'm not saying you don't do it. We can do that. It's just that you can't do it before January 14th.
Right.
So where do you stop? Prepare all this material, get it in front of the committee and the board. I mean, you had from January 3rd till today, which is the 11th.
So
I mean,
let me
there's
just let the.
only so much
question-
you can do.
The question that begs for me becomes, if we're going to look at redoing these other ones,
Yes.
that's the next election cycle. You wait until after this election and do them, because you can't do it in the middle of,
We can work on it, but we wouldn't be
You wouldn't do
publishing
it.
or approving
Right.
it. No.
okay,
You can still work on it.
I'm just making sure that
Yes.
my assumption is accurate by the methodology.
And I
That's
think
all.
that'll become a recurring theme where you're going to have to address this year in and year out as a part of splitting precincts. One of the things that's an interesting nuance that I think is important is that during this rewrite of the precincts is the merging and changing of lines to match district boundaries. My understanding is that in the future, we can split precincts, but as far as, merging and changing lines, that's kind of off the table until the next decennial census and redistricting. From this point forward, we would simply be taking the largest and splitting them. And maybe the state's attorney's office could weigh in on that, but I think that was the next hurdle is once you establish and adopt this, next year, we would only be considering splitting the oversized.
Mr. Chair, Bates, please.
And
Mrs.
Mr.
Bates?
Tepe, I have a question as well, a comment.
What? Ms. Bates?
I'm doing some math here, and which I like to do. So if our ideal number is 1,200, what are we dividing by 1,200? Is it the 300,000?
It's the voter population.
Yeah, the 300,000.
Just 316,000, I think you said. So I didn't do that math yet, but
It's
what would-
318.
It's about,
so 318 would be our logical number of precincts.
You'd have to take 318,000 registered voters, and then it's geospatial, so they have to be located, in adjacent or near each other, because you can't, draw spaces that are separated. But-
Geospatial, sure.
Yeah, so they had to be contiguous, let's say, right?
Okay,
Have to be
So-
contiguous, have to have the
Yeah.
same county board member, have to have the same state rep in general, with certain exceptions.
Based on this voter registration file, I was gonna tell you what the total is real quick.
looks like 265 would be our ideal number. So.
Theoretically.
Yeah, theoretically. So going down would be better than going up at this point in time. We don't want more than 292. We want less.
This voter registration file that we have as our work set is 317,605 registered voters in the
Okay.
precincts. That's exactly what we have out of the system.
If you divide that by 1,200, you get 318. No,
Right.
265.
Oops.
Okay, Madam Chair,
Thank
did you
you.
have something? And then we're going to
Thank you.
move on to the ordinance.
Yes, just as a follow-up to the workflow, we have to be mindful that while we can potentially continue with the redistricting of these precincts to either cut or move them appropriately so that we get to the 1,200. That exercise could take an additional several weeks to get done for all of the precincts. And our concern is for the upcoming election. Because once all of these precincts are defined and determined and all the data gets entered appropriately, even though now it's not being done by hand, there is a company that is going to be able to do it electronically to save a lot of time, effort, and ability for the clerk's office. I believe it takes 2+ weeks to get all of that information into the voter cards so that all of our 317,000 approximate voters will have the ability to know who they're going to be voting for in the upcoming primary election. So as this gets delayed with the redraw of the maps, so does the input from the clerk's office, which will delay that information getting out to the voters. And I'm not even putting the consideration of our candidates. I'm putting that aside. This is just for the voter information. So we have to factor that timeline in, not just our redraw of the map, but what Mr. Cunningham's office has got to go through.
Roger, could you go ahead with the ordinance?
Sure. Blair, I'm gonna let you have the screen share back to go back to the ordinance, and that would be the larger presentation. So. So you should all have a copy of the ordinance that is in the agenda packet, and I don't know if you want to have a discussion before you have a motion and a second on the ordinance and then do discussion, or do you want a presentation first?
Why don't we have a motion to accept the ordinance?
So procedurally, we're going to do the ordinance now, then a special meeting on Friday.
Correct.
So if between now and Friday, we find something, like I was just texted that Rutland 13 is split down the middle between the two congressional districts, the 8th and the 11th, do we have any ability to fine tune something like that before Friday? Or does that blow us out of the water and blah, 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 blah?
I'll
I'm just
defer that
asking.
question to Roger.
I mean, I'm just
you know,
asking. I mean,
We could look at that. I mean, I'd like to know, more detail about what the concern is. I think that the only way you would deal with it at this point would be some type of a motion to amend at the meeting. If we could get that into some type of language, we could potentially have that. But I don't see us reworking the maps before that meeting Friday. It just takes us a couple days to regenerate them. And at this point, you would, by the time we get the language and would try to generate a map, it would just, we would run out of time.
yeah, I'm just,
Kofi,
you're gonna be
please.
sunburnt on half of your face.
I know.
Just-
Can I have a motion to start the discussion?
So moved.
Surges moved second.
Leonard
Second by
seconds.
Leonard.
Blair, let's go to the presentation deck, actually, not the ordinance itself. I'd like to go through that a little bit. So just going back real quickly to where we were at last time we met. Blair has got it. Okay. So we were talking about alignment, splits, and merges, the county board district map. This was the original Westlaw kind of legal information and direction we received from the state's attorney about why we were doing this, and alignment of the jurisdictions, getting down to 1,200 registered voters per precinct where practicable. And then the kind of the catch is get it done in 60 days, which put the January 15th on us as well. I think, yeah, 14th is the Friday. So done by the 15th or 14th. So the approach, this was some of the kind of early discussion of the people involved in that. And then obviously some of the same things about the size of the precincts and merge. This gets into the part one, which is what we've completed. This is the realignment of the precinct lines with legislative, county board districts. We also did the congressional as well. We're waiting. The wards for the municipalities that have wards aren't being redrawn until later this year, and we'll also have to deal with that at some point in time. So then there was the second part, which was the redraw of the splits. And as I said, we went through anything over 3,000, anything over 2,000. We got down to about 1,600 in a precinct and stopped. It's not practicable as the language that was being referred to. And that's where you get into the 102 precincts that would have to be split, and needing another 2 weeks to do that, which that'll be picked up at a later date. There's also some precincts that were smaller than 500, and there was an opportunity to potentially merge some of those while we're redrawing lines. I think there was some of those that were dealt with as well. But this is kind of where we finished. And then there's part three, which is the fallout or the work that needs to be done as a result of this ordinance being approved. So you have an ordinance that's going to adopt the precincts that were drawn and the resultant splits of population. These were some of the dates that we discussed, and also this gets to the kind of the meat of the subject, which is the deadlines and the dates and why you have to expedite and do this in a week if you're going to try and meet the obligations under the statute, or you're going to say it's not practicable and you're going to extend it to another later date. I think getting into those 102, the reason why I point this out is the 102 that still would be split to get down to 1,200 means that the clerk's office probably would not get this data until well after the candidate filing. We wouldn't be done splitting them probably till the 1st of March. Certainly in February sometime, it would be. Obviously, you're going to run into the early voting in June. So, the sooner we can get this put together and understand it and get ready for the election, the better. I think trying to get through those 102 would put that in jeopardy. The restructuring, again, the one state representative, one county board member, one congressional representative, trying to keep it within a township as practicable. So those are the types of things that we were working on with the precinct restructuring. This was our work schedule. We are now at January 11th, which is the Special Public Service Committee seeing the ordinance. The maps were all distributed. The ordinance was distributed. You have copies of that. You've had it since yesterday. I realize it's short as far as the availability. That's what we had to deal with. You will have it up until the county board meets Friday on the 14th for a special meeting. So just kind of the current statistics, we had 291 precincts to start. We have 292 as proposed. The alignment of the precinct boundaries are done. Merge and splits were done. The naming convention to Aurora, for some of you that are not familiar with it, in Aurora, when we absorbed the Aurora Election Commission, when they were merged into the county clerk, They kept their precinct names as Ward 01, Precinct 01. So they're W01, P01. We're changing their naming convention to match up with the county. So they'll be AU01 through, I think, AU76. There's 23 precincts over 1,500 now. There's 39 precincts over 1,400. And there's 103 precincts over 1,200 if you count the one that's 1,200 even. So that's where we're at. And then the ordinance that you have before you, there's a printed copy that each of you have. In that printed copy of the ordinance, it refers to an Exhibit A. Exhibit A is 15 maps that represent the township and the precincts within the township. The only reason there's 15 is because Geneva and Batavia are combined in one township map, and it's because of geography again. But they're all 16 townships are represented with the precincts within. And what you'll see is in that Exhibit A, there's a map that looks something like this. Obviously the electronic version, you can drill in and get into greater detail. And there's larger versions of these that are online for the sake of putting them in a presentation. This is probably as best you're going to get without going to the detail maps. There's also a copy of the voter count. This is the precinct and the total voter population. It's also in that packet, and it's available online. This just simply tells you how many voters or registered voters are in each precinct. So again, there's the ordinance, there's Exhibit A, there's precinct maps by township, and there's precinct voter population. They're available for review online. It's under the Public Service Committee agenda for today, for January 11th. And that's available all on the county's website. So some of the next steps that we had were for January 14th was special county board meeting to adopt the ordinance. So between January 14th to January 28th, we have a process to import and export process. We think it's about 14 days. And then in January 28th to February, sometime in the middle of February, the clerk's office and elections would review and do validation. Best case scenario from our perspective to have this in production and available in the clerk's office is 4 weeks. Worst case scenario was about 6 weeks. The county clerk will have a lot of work to do to update all their information, all the resources and things that they do for the candidates, for the voting public, for voter cards, election judges, staff that needs to rework how their processes handle things. Those are kind of all left to be determined. We need to get into processing the data, and then we'll know more in a couple of weeks how that will pan out.
So you're like doing nothing between now and
so this is kind of the short version of part 3. If anybody's really interested, there's actually a detailed Gantt chart of what we're working on that one of our members provided. I think it's a helpful explanation. And again, going back to the we question, Mr. Shepro had asked about these are the people that were involved in the core work, whether it's the committee chair was also involved. Madam Chairman was involved in some of the meetings discussing, kind of the high level, what our work plan was. But these are the staff and the offices that were directly involved in putting this together. And then, like I said, I think that's the end of this slide presentation. There is the ordinance, Blair, if you want to go back to the ordinance. The ordinance has a full copy of every map and has a full copy of every precinct with population in it. And I think that's all we needed to present at this point. So questions, Mr. Chairman?
And the ordinance was drawn up by the state's attorney's office. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Question by Copy.
Okay, Mr. Copey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Roger, I don't know if this question is within your purview or not, but give it a shot, or maybe Ms. Musser. we're kind of avoiding a very pertinent question that was raised by Commissioner Shepro, and I don't mean to be digressing, but that is the question is, are we creating a more illegal condition? Okay, I'll leave that there. But who would
Let's answer that
challenge?
question. Let's answer that
Who would
question.
challenge that, and what is the exposure to the county? And then I have one more question.
Let's answer that question.
Okay.
So the question is, are we creating a morally illegal situation?
More illegal.
Oh, more illegal. I was going to say, I don't have anything to say about morals on this. No, we do not believe that we are. We believe that we are doing everything we possibly can, given the situation that we're in. And that if this were to be challenged by a person, that we would be able to show all of the good faith efforts that were put on behalf of the county board, GIS, the clerk's office, information technologies, under the advice of the state's attorney's office.
Okay, thank you. And then one more question. If we were to, if I may, Mr. Chairman. If we were to approve this resolution, what are the options other than to simply bite the bullet the Wild West style and forge our way through this?
I can't hear you clearly, Mr. Kopiak. We can't hear you clearly.
Oh, I'm so sorry. What are the options in the event that we? Well, actually, there are no options. This is the offer by the staff, the clerk, you, Mr. Tepe, and everybody that's worked on it. This is the option. And I was going to say, what is the other option if indeed there is a question about the of creating a more unlegal, if you will, condition. So it's a yin and yang thing here, but I would be willing to concede. It's difficult though. I wish that the deliberations could have, it alludes to a certain carelessness of the committee, but it could just simply be a pure fortitude on your part, Mr. Chairman. That question may remain. I personally respect your tenacity. Most of all, I do appreciate you having the indulgence and allowing me to voice my concerns, my questions, my opinions, and not be stifled by some tricky parliamentary maneuver. Thank you very much.
Mr. Kopi, you might feel like you're between a rock and a hard place. Am I correct with that?
You are.
And I've felt that way for the past 2 weeks. So, okay. Shall we call the question? Please
Mr.
call the
Chairman,
roll.
Bates, please.
Yes, Ms. Bates.
Because we were having this clash of the titans between you and Mr. Shepro, I would like to know what result did Mr. Shepro think we should have gotten from this process that we didn't? Is there something wrong with this result?
Mr. Shepro.
The answer is yes.
Can you help me understand it?
I don't want to take any up more of the valuable time of this committee. I'd be happy to discuss it with you offline. And I think a document will be forthcoming that will address it specifically.
From you? Please don't talk to me like a lawyer. Talk to me so I understand.
Well, as Mr. Tepe has said, I think my position has been made perfectly clear throughout this. But if I could summarize, it would have been so easy for our chairman of this committee to come to this committee with all the work that had been done I've been over the years getting talked to about what is the proper role of a committee. And it's not to micromanage. It is to set broad guidelines as to the direction and aim of what it is that is confined to the committee's jurisdiction. And a point was made early on, where would this issue go? And somebody, not me, decided that it would go to this committee. But it didn't go to this committee. It went to the chairman of the committee, and the chairman of the committee started off the first meeting by a mysterious, we can't continue with the meeting. And we didn't know why. And you were one of the people that I think questioned that. And we didn't find out for several days that maybe it was no big deal. We learn now that all these good people, talented people have been involved in this process, but there are repeated references in Mr. Teppe's report to, we decided, we set the direction, we set the goals. No. And he doesn't want to say he did it. He said it was a collective decision, but this committee was never even asked to approve the decision. And that is the direction that, as I understand it, is the role of a committee, is to set a general direction and not do nothing or not be asked to do nothing. And again, it would have been so easy. I never suggested every member of this committee had to go to a meeting and listen or participate, only that the opportunity should have been afforded and the committee informed. And I am still, don't feel that I got an answer. If this statute was in place on November 15th, why didn't we start this process right away? Instead, first we were only going to do 4, then we were going to do 24. What changed? The legislation was there, didn't change after November 15th. This process could have been started, and frankly, this process could have been started last summer. The comment was made at the time, the precincts don't necessarily have to have anything to do with the nature of the districts. And when we say we have to do that, we keep using the word practicable when we want an excuse why we didn't finish everything. But that same term practicable appears with respect to precincts not overlapping congressional districts and so forth. So why did we make a selective use of that term when it suited us and ignored it when somebody didn't like it? All of these things, I think, are things which should have at least been discussed or disclosed or an opinion given in writing. Even on December 28th, when it's indicated I was copied on a memo, there was no suggestion to discuss it. I had a discussion with one representative of the state's attorney's office in which I thought we had a solution to the time problem, but nothing ever came of it. So that's my concern. And we still are not going to have any meaningful opportunity to review the individual maps. We have until, I don't know, I mean, and frankly, if we had changes, I would agree with the comment that it's really too late to make any changes, even if we had them. All of this could have been avoided if we hadn't kept going off in different directions from at least the middle of November until the end of December. So that's my concern.
Point of clarification is that you are objecting to the process and not the result. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know enough to comment on the result because I haven't had time to review it. I haven't had time to consult with the people who will be directly affected by this.
All right,
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lewis.
Yes, Anita Lewis. I just
want to go on record as saying that many of us have voiced some concerns, maybe about lack of transparency or even the process that was done. But none of us have questioned the fact that the GIS department, the state's attorney's office, the clerks, and yourself, that you guys have done an exceptional job with what you were given and in the time constraints and the fact that we've got to get this done right now. And I don't think there was any partisan, it was just done as best you guys could do. So because of that, I am ready to vote yes and get on with it.
May we have a roll call?
Brown, Leonard,
Leonard, yes.
Lewis,
Lewis, yes.
Shepro,
Jeffro, no.
Surges, Copy,
I defer to our legal counsel. I vote yes.
Tepe,
Tepe, yes.
passes.
Thank you. I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
Leonard moves.
Second by Lewis.
Lewis seconds. All in favor?
Aye.